So what is really happening here, and why does it matter far beyond fighter jets? Because while the world is busy debating Canada's $19 billion F-35 decision, something far quieter, far deeper, and far more disruptive has been unfolding in the background. Canada didn't just talk to Sweden. Canada didn't just explore options. Canada committed to 88 Saab Gripens. And this was not a fallback. This was not leverage. This was intent. The question at the heart of this story is simple but uncomfortable. What happens when a middle power decides it no longer wants to rent its security from a superpower? For decades, Canada accepted a familiar role, a reliable ally, a junior partner, buy American platforms, integrate into American-led systems, and trust that alliance loyalty would always translate into protection. It was efficient, predictable, and politically safe, but it also came with a price that most people never noticed because it was paid quietly, year after year, in lost control, lost industry, and lost strategic freedom. Now that bill has come due. Canada's move toward the Gripen is not about rejecting NATO. It's not about weakening alliances. It's about answering a question Ottawa can no longer avoid. Can a country truly defend its sovereignty if it does not control the tools of its own defense? That question didn't appear overnight. It grew slowly, driven by three pressures that converged at the same time. First, cost. The F-35 was sold as a revolutionary platform, but for Canada, it became a financial black hole. Unit prices climbed. Sustainment costs ballooned. Life cycle estimates kept changing. What began as a manageable procurement turned into an open-ended financial commitment stretching decades into the future. Each revision reduced Canada's room to maneuver in other defense priorities, especially Arctic surveillance and readiness. Second, readiness. Numbers that rarely make headlines told a troubling story. Mission availability hovering between 30 and 50%. Complex maintenance chains. Software dependencies that required external approval. For a country responsible for vast airspace, much of it remote, frozen, and infrastructure poor, a jet that is powerful but frequently grounded is not a solution. It is a vulnerability. Third, and most important, control, or rather, the lack of it. With the F-35, Canada would not own the software. It would not control upgrades. It would not freely integrate non-US weapons without approval. Every major modification would require permission routed through Washington. This is not a conspiracy. It is how the program was designed. Defense analysts call it structured dependency. You operate the aircraft, but you do not command its evolution. And this is where the Gripen enters the story. Not as a miracle aircraft, but as a fundamentally different philosophy. The Gripen does not promise dominance. It promises independence. Canada gets access to the source code. Canada chooses which weapons to integrate. Canada controls mission data, upgrades, and future development. The jet becomes a national platform, not a leased capability. In strategic terms, that distinction is everything. But here comes the challenge, the real one, sitting at the center of this story. Can Canada afford to step outside the gravitational pull of the American defense ecosystem without paying a political and strategic price? Because pressure has already been applied before, subtly, quietly, sometimes not so quietly. From trade disputes to defense procurement signals, Ottawa has learned that independence has consequences. The message has often been implied rather than spoken. Align or face friction. Buy American or expect complications. The F-35 was never just a jet, it was a symbol of staying in line. And yet Canada watched Switzerland. Switzerland's F-35 experience became a warning flare, costs rising far beyond initial agreements, operational constraints appearing after the contract was signed, limitations on mission use, data sharing, and export options. What looked like a clean deal on paper turned into what critics now call mortgage sovereignty. Canada paid attention. Then Canada looked north, not south. Geography changed the equation completely. The Arctic is no longer theoretical. Melting ice is opening shipping routes. Foreign aircraft and submarines are testing response times. The distances are vast, the conditions brutal, and the infrastructure minimal. This is not an environment designed for aircraft that depend on pristine runways and large maintenance crews. The Gripen was built for this reality. Short takeoff distances, dispersed operations, minimal ground crews, rapid turnaround times, proven performance from roads, frozen runways, and austere bases. Not because it looks good in brochures, but because Sweden built it expecting to fight while outnumbered, outgunned, and under pressure. And here is where the story deepens beyond jets. The deal with Sweden is not transactional. It is industrial. Final assembly in Canada, maintenance by Canadian engineers, software software development within Canadian firms, and most critically, engine manufacturing commitments that bring high-end aerospace production back to Canadian soil for the first time since the Avro era was cancelled in 1959. That cancellation still echoes. Thousands of engineers laid off overnight, a generation of talent lost. A nation that once led aerospace innovation reduced to a buyer instead of a builder. Many of those engineers went on to shape American space and defense programs, carrying Canadian expertise south. The Gripen deal is not just procurement, it is historical repair. Economic analysts estimate tens of thousands of jobs over time, a revived supply chain, a domestic capacity to sustain, modify, and evolve a fighter platform without external permission. This is not symbolism, this is leverage. And this is why the deal matters globally, because it challenges an assumption that has shaped post-Cold War security, that meaningful air power must flow through a single, superpower-controlled system. Canada is testing a different model, one where alliances are partnerships, not dependencies, where interoperability does not mean subordination, where sovereignty is exercised through capability, not rhetoric. Of course, risks remain. Political pressure will not disappear. Integration challenges with NATO systems will be scrutinized. Lobbying forces will push back. And sustaining industrial momentum over decades requires discipline that governments often lack. But the direction is clear. Canada is no longer asking which jet is the most powerful on paper. It is asking which choice preserves freedom of action in an uncertain future. Gripen does not replace alliances, it rebalances them. It signals to Washington that partnership does not require compliance. It signals to smaller nations that independence is possible without isolation. And it signals that the Arctic, once ignored, is now central to national strategy. So the solution Canada is pursuing is not technological supremacy, but strategic autonomy. Not dominance, but resilience. Not alignment at any cost, but cooperation on equal terms. And that brings us to the final question, the one that will define the next decade of global defense politics. If Canada can reclaim control over its air power without abandoning its allies, how many other nations will realize they can do the same? The implications of that question stretch far beyond Ottawa, Stockholm, or even NATO itself. Because if Canada succeeds, if it proves that a mid-sized nation can maintain alliance credibility while reclaiming technological and operational control, then a precedent is set. And precedents in geopolitics are dangerous things for established power structures. Other countries are watching closely. Australia, Finland, even some Eastern European states quietly frustrated by dependency-driven defense models. They all face the same dilemma Canada faced: accept advanced platforms with strings attached, or accept responsibility for sovereignty with all the risks that come with it. And this is where urgency enters the story. The global security environment is tightening. Great power competition is no longer theoretical. Supply chains are being weaponized. Technology access is being politicized. Data is becoming as sensitive as territory. In this environment, dependence is not neutral. It is exposure. Canada understood this at a critical moment. The Gripen decision is happening while the rules are still being written, not after they've hardened. Once a country locks itself into a closed ecosystem like the F-35 for 40 or 50 years, exiting becomes almost impossible without enormous financial and political cost. Canada chose to pivot before the door closed. That timing matters, because future conflicts will not be fought only with hardware, but with software updates, data access, and operational permissions. A jet that cannot be modified without foreign approval is not fully yours, no matter whose flag is painted on it. This is the lesson Switzerland learned too late. It is the lesson Canada is trying to apply early. But there is also a psychological dimension to this shift, one that rarely gets discussed. For decades, Canadian defense culture internalized the idea that independence was unrealistic, that scale mattered more than control, that being close to power was safer than standing apart from it. Gripen challenges that mindset. It says efficiency can beat excess. It says adaptability can beat brute force. It says sovereignty is not about matching superpowers jet for jet, but about ensuring no one else holds the off switch to your security. That message resonates far beyond fighter squadrons. It affects how nations think about cyber defense, space assets, energy security, and even food supply chains. The same logic applies everywhere. If you cannot operate without permission, you are not fully secure. Of course, none of this this guarantees success. Canada will face friction, political winds may shift, future governments may waver, industrial programs can stall if not protected. Strategic independence is not a one-time purchase, it is a continuous commitment. But the direction has been chosen, and that alone changes the conversation. Instead of asking, what will Washington allow? Canada is asking, what do we need to defend ourselves effectively? That is a subtle shift, but it is revolutionary in practice. And this is why the world is paying attention, even if quietly. Because Gripen is not just an aircraft in this story. It is a symbol of a broader realignment. A reminder that alliances are strongest when members bring real capability and autonomy to the table, not just loyalty. In the coming years, analysts will debate whether this choice weakened or strengthened NATO, whether interoperability suffered or improved, whether Canada gained leverage or lost favor. But one thing is already clear. Canada has stopped outsourcing the definition of its own security. And in a world where uncertainty is the only constant, that may turn out to be the most powerful weapon of all. So as other nations watch Canada chart this path, the final question becomes impossible to ignore. Will they continue to accept dependence as the price of protection, or will they follow Canada's lead and reclaim control while they still can?